We welcome you to the National Citizens Inquiry as we begin day 2 of our hearings in Red Deer, Alberta. Commissioners, for the record, my name is Buckley, initial S. I'm attending as agent this morning for the inquiry administrator, the Honourable Chess Crosby. I'd like to start for those that are not aware of the National Citizens Inquiry that we are a citizen-run and funded group. Excuse me, it's interesting how I always have a frog in my throat when I start these openings. But we're citizen-run and funded. And we depend on you to make donations to keep this going. This costs us about $35,000 for each set of 3 hearings. We anticipate the Quebec City one is going to be much more expensive because we need real-time translators. And if we don't get volunteers, so I'm asking if you're out there and you are a real-time translator that can attend in Quebec City in 2 weeks, to contact the National Citizens Inquiry. Our emails are on our site. And put in bold in the subject line, French translator. We also need teachers. We want to have some discussions with teachers about what's been going on with kids, and we might want you to participate in an online event about that. And I can tell you that I'm frustrated, and I think a lot of people are frustrated, that the mainstream media isn't covering us. Has any time in our known history have citizens of any country banded together, appointed independent commissioners, and marched them across the country, let alone one as large as Canada, to inquire into a significant government action on an event that has changed all of our lives? And that in itself should be a front news story. It should be the leading story on TV. And yet it's really not a story at all. And, we try to get the message out on social media. I think, like YouTube keeps taking us down, and TikTok and the like, we're still getting censored. Even on Twitter, apparently, there's something happening where when people are searching for us, they can't find us, even though in theory Twitter isn't banned. And what's frustrating is that we're all living in a country where actually we're still pretending that a reality that is false is true. We can't have a discussion with half of the country about what actually really happened. It's like the emperor is still out there and the little boy hasn't pointed up to say, well, the emperor has no clothes, because the emperor has no clothes. And we need to be the little boy. The NCI needs to be the little boy, because the reality is, if you watch an entire day of the National Citizens Inquiry, you will be changed. And we need to get people watching the National Citizens Inquiry. And I've asked everyone, use your social media to get us out there. But I'm asking you now to become creative, because what you can do is figure out maybe you should run an extension cord out, put your TV out by the sidewalk on your lawn, and live stream us. And when we're not running, we've got videos of the past ones, so that anyone walking down your street has to know what's happening. We have to think outside of the box. If you've got one of those big screen TVs on a van, park it in a busy street and run our hearings and run the recorded ones. Somehow, we have to get people watching. And we're just a small little group of volunteers that are scrambling just to be ready for the next hearing. We truly need you to do it. That's what a citizen initiative is. It's you getting involved in doing things. So that's my call out today. And I want to move to my opening remarks and share with you a story that, well, it's not a story, it's something that happened to me and it changed my life. I'm not sure how many years ago. I'm going to guess 15, 16, because I recall that my kids were with us. Going up to Valemount, BC in August. It's probably noon. It's a sunny day. This is a perfect day for a nice travel. And got the family in the vehicle and going down the road. And for the first time in my life, I ran into a daytime police roadblock blocking both lanes of traffic, not checking just commercial vehicles, checking every single vehicle on the road. You had to stop. Traffic was backed up. This is a major highway, the Yellowhead Highway. And they were making inquiries of every single vehicle. And I was fit to be tied, because up until that moment, but it ended, I was free to drive on a highway in Canada without encountering a police roadblock. I had been free till then, but that freedom had just been taken away from me. And they're still doing that in the interior of BC, and the worst offender is the Valemount RCMP detachment. But you see, I lost that freedom, and my kids lost that freedom that day, and that freedom can't be taken back unless we get enraged and force the police to back down. but we never get enraged and we never force them to back down. And as I reflected on that, or actually steamed and boiled about that, I remember thinking, I'm glad my dad's not here. Like, he's never been in trouble with the police, but he would have just gone ballistic. My dad was born in 1939, a few months before Germany invaded Poland, and the official start of the Second World War started on September 1st. And so he was raised in his generation, because each generation has a different idea of what's tolerable and what isn't. And in his generation, roadblock equals police state, full stop. Free societies do not have roadblocks for their citizens. Free societies do not have identification papers, full stop. And that's why I was glad he wasn't there, because to him, he might as well have been in Stalinist Russia. And but a precedent's been set. You see, for my children, that's now normal. You know, when we approach the holiday season, we have holiday check stops now. We all expect it because the danger of drunk drivers. And we can't challenge safety. So I was about to say it, and I'm not minimizing the danger of drunk drivers, because I've been conditioned, you can't argue about safety, and I'll talk about that a little later. But we've been conditioned to accept as normal that in the holiday season, the police can set up roadblocks and check every single vehicle, which means those of us that aren't drinking are going to be stopped. Now, understand, in my generation, I grew up, by the time I was driving, we had them. So to me, that's normal. But the generation before me, they were free from that. They were free from that. In fact, the courts had to decide on issues like roadblocks for safety. We're not a police state, the Crown argued to the court. It's not like we're Nazi Germany and stopping people just for their identity papers. We're doing this to protect people. Do you know how dangerous drunk driving is? Do you know how many people die from drunk driving? And the court said, yeah, we'll accept this for safety. It's always about safety. You know, you're not supposed to use the words always and never, but I literally can say that almost always the courts side on safety. And that's because in our society, you can't argue against safety. You're a villain. But the irony is there's nothing more dangerous. There is nothing more dangerous than granting the police and granting the state more power. Nothing. Any historian can tell you the largest cause of death is government. Full stop. And I see people in the audience nodding. They know exactly what I'm talking about. The largest cause of death is government. I mean, just in our last century, well, let's go back a little longer, but I mean, we've got Nazi Germany, we have Stalinist Russia, China. I mean, just examples that just pop to the tongue. And here we are in Canada. And, you know, it started as early as I can remember, I was fascinated with the Holocaust because I was so horrified. I couldn't get my head around how that could happen. And more so because, you know, Germany was a Western nation. They were educated. They were just like us. And I studied. I mean, in university, I took classes on it. I was just fascinated. And I wasn't mature enough to understand that a question I was asking myself just showed that I didn't understand. And the question I'd ask myself is, how could the Germans do this? See, that shows that I totally don't understand, because I was thinking that they were different than, let's say, Canadians. See, by even asking the question, how could the Germans do that, I'm implying that Canadians couldn't do that. And I didn't understand that actually we're all the same. There's no difference between Germans and Canadians. There's no difference at all. So I didn't understand that it could happen here and that it will happen here. So, you know, I've spoken a couple of times about how, you know, during this COVID thing, I was hearing about putting unvaccinated people in camps. And some people are nodding their heads. There was that dialogue. We heard about putting unvaccinated people in camps. Not by the government. They weren't saying that. But other people were saying that, and it was trending on social media and the like. But you want to know what was scary, even though the government wasn't saying that? Did you see our prime minister or any member of our government stand up and denounce that talk? Because in a society that has responsible leadership, you do not allow the citizens to publicly have a discourse about putting a subgroup of citizens into detention camps without standing up and saying that is not appropriate and that's not going to happen. So why did not a single politician at any level that I am aware of, other than maybe Randy Hillier, stand up and challenge that dialogue? You know, I mentioned Randy Hillier. I watched a video, and I'm sure it's online. He was a member of the Provincial Legislative Assembly in Ontario during the COVID adventure that we just went through. And I watched a video where he's, as an opposition MLA, is asking the government, well, there are detention camps being built in Ontario because there were detention camps being built across Canada by the federal government during COVID. Were you aware of that? You know, so back to, you know, when I was naive, well, it couldn't happen here. He was asking the government, okay, well, we're building detention camps across Canada. He's asking, we're building them in Ontario. Who are they for? Who are the camps for? That's a good question. The camps are still there. Who are they for? We're not different. We're not different at all. And we're setting precedents here. You see, the police state can happen here. For my generation, holiday roadblocks are normal. For the next generation, daytime ones will be normal. Do you understand that for our young kids right now, for our children right now, masks are normal? Like for us, it's just this horrible affront. You know, whether you supported the idea of wearing them or not, it's like, oh my gosh, we're wearing masks. For our young children, that's normal. For our young children who watch their parents, being afraid of government is normal. Because we're now afraid of our government. The power balance has so far moved. But what's worse, and listen to this, because our children watched us, for our children, being afraid of each other is now normal. And I don't know how we come back from that. Passports have become normal for our children. And I've mentioned this in other openings, but it's so important to understand that passports are a police state ritual. So here we had the situation in Canada where for the vaccinated to access restaurants and hockey games and they had to show their identity papers. That's a police state ritual. See, let's just go back to, you know, the classic police state, you know, so you're in Stalinist Russia or Nazi Germany or the interior of British Columbia, and you're at a police roadblock. No, it's not funny, because we have roadblocks in the interior of British Columbia. Somebody here just left. It's not funny at all. So you're at a traditional police state roadblock, and you have to show your papers. You know, so you're in a city and a main intersection is blocked. The police state doesn't care where you're going. They know where you live. They know where you're going to sleep at night. That's secondary. See, before, when you don't have the police state, and for us, so let's just talk about the vaccinated that participated in this ritual. Before this ritual, they were free to go wherever they wanted. They didn't have to show identity papers. They were free. And even the idea of thinking you had to do something before you could go to a hockey game or do something to access a restaurant, that would have been just crazy talk, because you were free. But what the ritual does is, at a subconscious level, it teaches you you're not free. Because for you to go to that Oilers game, you have to basically give your passport, and the symbolism is you're not free to go there. You're no longer free. You have to go through this, you have to participate in this action dictated from your master, the government, before you can participate. And subconsciously, every time you do this, you are reinforcing that the government is your master, and for you to access this privilege, because if you can't go there just on your own without this ritual, it's not a right. So to access this privilege, you have to humiliate yourself and reinforce in your mind that who's the master and who's the servant, and it's a ritual. And our children watched this. Your children watched you in Canada give your identity papers. We call them vaccine passport. They watched you give identity papers for you to access services. And how do you redeem yourself from that? How do we come back from having our children watch us in Canada show identity papers to do things that we were free to do before? And this talk just came to me at about 7:30 this morning. I had no idea what I was going to open with, and then it's like, oh, start talking about this, and I just started writing cursory notes. I mean, I hardly have anything on a piece of paper, just the thoughts. And the thought of Gandhi came to me. I must have been a kid watching that Gandhi movie. And after there was all these riotings, and Hindus are killing Muslims, and Muslims are killing Hindus, and there's this scene where this one man comes to Gandhi, and he's just torn. He is in absolute distress, and he tells Gandhi, and I forget if he was a Muslim or a Hindu, but let's just say he was a Hindu. And he says, I murdered a Muslim child. How do I get redemption? And Gandhi, in his peaceful way, said, you find a Hindu child whose parents have been murdered, and you raise him to be Hindu. How do you come back from having your children watch you give identity papers to access services? And I ask you this, and it's the most important question that anyone's going to ask you for the rest of your life. Will your children see you resist identity papers going forward? Will they? Will you redeem yourself? Because digital passports are coming to Canada. And even the word passport's something we don't use internally in a country. You use a passport to go to another country, and we've been conditioned to think, oh, well, we need this to get permission. How could we call this a vaccine passport? And do you think that was an accident? It wasn't an accident. People that, a pay grade well above mine, and a large number of them would have come up with that term as the best term to condition us to accept identification papers. So even the word passport should be alarming you. And the government is using that term for the digital ID. We also hear digital passports. And that should be alarming us. The government is talking about us, and the stores are already putting turnstiles in. So one of the stores that I go to on my if I have time, and right now with the NCI I don't, but if I have time when I go grocery shopping, I go to Superstore first, and then I go to my small little organic place. And not long ago, Superstore has put turnstiles. They're the type that just push open as you go through. They're not locked or anything, but it's new and it's deliberate, and other stores are putting them in. And this is to condition us for our digital passports. See, because they don't hinder our access, but you're going to have to ask the question, why is Superstore putting these little turnstiles that I have to go through when I enter the store? They weren't there before. The store's been there as long as I've lived in St. Albert, so it's been there for at least 7 years. Why are they there? And they don't require a digital passport. They don't even lock. They're clearly not there to scan my ID. But they're conditioning me to know that they're there, so that when the locking ones are put in, where I do have to give my digital ID for it to unlock, it will be less of a change for me. That's why they're there now, to condition me so that I can accept them. Now, when the digital IDs come out, they will be sold for our safety. It's always about our safety. They'll be tied to our health records, and somehow this will all be for our safety. Probably, fight organized crime. Who knows what the reasons will be, but I just promise you they will be for our safety, because we give up freedom for safety. And you can't argue about safety. I remember years ago, first Harper government, they introduced Bill C-51 against the Food and Drug Act, and the natural health community went ballistic because it was basically a transition away from using the courts to discipline people. So what's been happening in our legislation, both federally and provincially, is it used to be if you violated some act or regulation, you'd get charged and go to court. But the problem is that sometimes courts are reasonable. And I take that back. A judge on a regulatory matter, he or she's just going to do their job, and the system works. But that's very inconvenient for the state. Why not just allow big administrative penalties that can destroy people and have an internal appeal process despite the conflict of interest? And they were moving that way. I got involved in the Bill C-51 fight, but they introduced a similar bill, Bill C-52, the Consumer Product Safety Act. You probably all heard about that in the news. It was, we're going to make baby cribs safer and all of this. And I didn't fight that one the first time round. And, I fought Bill C-51, and there was a tremendous movement. And then an election is called, and they don't reintroduce Bill C-51, but they reintroduce the Consumer Product Safety Act. And I wasn't going to fight that one because I was into protecting natural health products. And I remember getting a call from the CEO of a very large baby toy and crib and carriage manufacturer. And the CEO was saying, are you going to do anything? And it's like, no, even though the word for word, all those provisions were the same as the other one that I fought. I said, no, I'm not, but why aren't you? And he said, you can't. It'd be a public disaster nightmare for any in the industry, because everyone knew this was just going police state, full on. It had nothing to do with safety. In fact, ironically, the more tougher the legislation on safety, the less safe we become in things like baby toys and the like. But he says, no one in the industry can stand up against this because the media will slaughter us. So you understand, you can't fight safety, you're a villain. So they were asking me to pick up the fight. And it just shook me to the core. So here a whole industry that is going to be pummeled, that are going to be moved out of the rule of law, can't stand up and protest because they know that they'll be slaughtered in the media as villains for going against safety. So understand, safety is a trap. Safety is a weapon. Safety is the most dangerous word in the English dictionary when uttered by a government. Safety literally equals death. We're experiencing that. We just went through a situation where a large number of Canadians became vaccinated for safety, and we are seeing witness after witness here. The historians will probably write and call this a pandemic of the vaccinated. And the numbers haven't peaked. We're going to be calling Ed Dowd as a witness in Vancouver, who's an expert on crunching actuarial data. And one thing that is alarming is the number of working-age population, our most healthy people, who are becoming disabled. I live in the province of Alberta, and last year, the largest cause of death was unknown. That wasn't even a category that they could use a couple of years ago. Well, it's not unknown. It's caused by the vaccine, but we can't admit it yet. And because we can't admit it, we can't solve the problem and stop the damage. But this was done for our safety, and it's just an example of how dangerous that is. So it's an example, and the world sees Canada as a police state. Do you understand that? The world sees Canada as a police state. And that's because we are a police state. And with things like the digital passport coming, 15-minute cities coming, restrictions on, our agriculture and the whole thing, it's just coming down. The cell door is closing. The cell door is closing, and you may, and I use the word may, you may be able to still get out of the cell. There might still be enough room between the edge of the cell door and the wall that you may be able to get out. But I can't tell you that you will, because we are so far down that road that it's just almost impossible for us to tell. So you have to start sharing the testimony of the National Citizens Inquiry with everyone that you can. You literally have to put the TV out on the street. We have to stop this. We have to get people understanding what the truth is. And people will watch this forum because it is controlled, it is under oath, it is managed by independent commissioners, and so it's safe. And so I'm calling on all of you to put your foot between the cell door and the wall, because we don't have much time. And I'd like now to call our first witness of the day, who I'm very pleased to announce, Mr.